There are places in America where the ground itself remembers what men try to bury. December 23rd, 1855. The Kellerman family, 6 souls clinging to the promise of a better life in the Kentucky Highlands, walked into their coal mine before dawn and were never seen again. The official story was simple. A natural collapse. A tragic accident. Nothing more. But history lies. Because 34 years later, on his deathbed, a man confessed to something far darker, a murder disguised as disaster, orchestrated not by criminals, but by the rising elite of industrial America. This was no accident. It was an execution. The deeper you go into this story, the more it stops being about one family and becomes about you. Because this isn't just history, it's a pattern, a blueprint of power written in blood and coal, where corporations learned how to make entire families disappear. And what happened in that mine was only the beginning. Before the mine swallowed them, the Kellermans had uncovered something no one else in Kentucky could see, a vein of coal so rich, so pure, it could fuel the entire industrial ambitions of Louisville for decades. Heinrich Kellerman, a German immigrant who had gambled on a rocky hillside, stumbled into what would later be worth over $200,000, a fortune in 1855, more than the dreams of most men could contain. Word of the discovery traveled fast, carried on whispers and wagons of coal, and with it traveled straight into the offices of men who valued money over life, men who had already learned to bend law, politics, and violence to their will. Jeremiah Whitlock, director of the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company, saw the threat immediately. One small family could unravel decades of monopoly building. One immigrant with a stubborn sense of justice could cost him millions. So the wheels of industrial malice began turning. Offers were made. Threats were implied. Legal pressure mounted. And all the while, Heinrich, Martha, and their children remained stubbornly human, blind to the predator circling their property. They believed the world still operated on fairness. They had not yet learned that power hides in shadows and that coal like blood can be bought and buried. By December 1855, Heinrich Kellerman's family was marked, not by chance, not by accident, but by men who had studied the human heart and found it expendable. Samuel Briggs, Whitlock's agent, arrived in Pine Ridge under the guise of a surveyor, a polite stranger with a measured smile. He watched the Kellermans' routines, noting every hour, every pattern, every vulnerability. The family's life was now a puzzle to be solved, a machine whose cogs could be removed without anyone suspecting foul play. Whitlock, in his Louisville office, signed the final authorization. He called it the Pine Ridge Solution. Sterile, bureaucratic language for premeditated murder. 5 lives weighed less than the price of a coal shipment, and he understood that fully. Briggs' instructions were precise. Dynamite placed to simulate a natural cave-in, timed so that the family would be deepest underground, their escape impossible. No traces of sabotage, no witnesses, just a perfectly staged industrial accident. He calculated every detail, wind patterns, excavation depth, even the likelihood of someone passing by to intervene. Everything had to align, because in the calculus of power, perfection is the only defense against truth. And so, the machinery of death moved forward quietly, invisibly. The Kentucky Highlands, frozen and silent in winter, had become a stage for one of America's first corporate murders. The Kellermans went about their work, unaware that every routine, every light, every step had been studied by a man who saw them as obstacles to profit. Heinrich checked his mine beams, Martha packed lunches, the children laughed, their breaths visible in the freezing winter air. To them, it was just another day, ordinary, predictable, human. Yet shadows moved across the ridges. Briggs watched from a distance, a ghost among the pines. his pulse steady as he timed the moment when coal would become coffin. He had memorized the family's habits, their deepest tunnel, the exact hour they would reach the mine's most vulnerable point. Even their dreams, Hinrich later confided to Martha, were tainted with unease. He could not explain why his mind foresaw collapse, why instinct whispered danger in the dark. Martha, practical and strong, encouraged trust in their judgment, unaware that trust itself had become lethal. Letters stopped arriving. Neighbors kept distance. Unseen eyes lingered on their cabin, vanishing when approached. Every subtle sign of intimidation, mail, commerce, isolation, was part of a carefully orchestrated psychological siege. The Kellermans were humanity in its purest form, utterly vulnerable to a world that had already decided they were expendable. On the evening of December 22nd, the Kellermans gathered for their final dinner, unaware it would be the last time their family sat together in safety. Coal dust clung to their clothes, hands calloused from labor, faces illuminated by lamplight and quiet conversation. They spoke of Christmas bread, of gifts, of the promise of prosperity that had brought them to these mountains. Hinrich checked the support beams one last time, muttering in German about dangers that had never troubled him before. Martha noticed the tension in his eyes but offered comfort. The children laughed, oblivious to the dark calculus unfolding beyond their cabin walls. Across the ridge, Samuel Briggs moved with a predator's precision. Every charge was placed, every wire concealed, every contingency accounted for. He had studied every moment of the Kellerman's day for weeks. The exact hour they would be deep in the mine, the locations that would make escape impossible, the timing of the winter sunlight. This was not chance, not fate, not accident. This was industrialized murder, a crime of calculation, patience, and cold efficiency. The mine itself had become a trap, a tomb engineered to silence one family and protect a growing empire. And yet in the cabin, laughter and warmth persisted, fleeting, fragile, human. December 23rd, 1855. Dawn broke grey and bitter over the Kentucky Highlands. The Kellermans rose before sunrise, their breath clouding the frigid air, their hearts unaware of the precision-engineered death waiting for them below the mountain. Hinrich led his family into the mine, lanterns in hand, laughter mingling with coal dust, their routine rehearsed to perfection. From a concealed ridge, Samuel Briggs watched, calm as a surgeon, counting each step, each moment, each heartbeat. The dynamite lay ready, wired with a makeshift electrical plunger designed to collapse the mine at 10:15 a.m., when the family would be deepest in the tunnel, farthest from any escape. Timing was everything. Too early, and the trap would fail. Too late, and the family might emerge alive. Inside, the Kellermans worked with habitual diligence. Hinrich and Johann loaded the richest vein. Martha and Maria sorted coal. Young Wilhelm carried smaller pieces, careful with the lanterns. Baby Elizabeth played nearby. Every movement, ordinary, human, unaware of the doom above. Then Briggs pressed the plunger. A rumble tore through the mountains, a shockwave felt miles away. Dust and rock cascaded in precise chaos, sealing the mine and the Kellerman's fate. No screams escaped. No bodies would be recovered. The collapse appeared natural, a tragic accident, perfectly orchestrated. This was America's first corporate-sponsored mass murder, executed with the cold logic of profit and power. The dust settled over Pine Ridge, but the air remained heavy with unease. Neighbors rushed to the mine, spades and lanterns in hand, their hearts pounding with the hope of rescue. But the entrance was sealed under tons of rock, a perfect tomb crafted by human hands. No one emerged. No one survived. Samuel Briggs arrived shortly after, blending seamlessly into the chaos. Shocked expressions, hushed whispers, and frantic digging provided the perfect theater. He offered guidance, feigned concern, and subtly manipulated the rescuers, ensuring that any evidence of sabotage would remain buried. Even the note left by Thomas Hartley, a crucial witness, was reframed as irrelevant, blown about by the wind, casting doubt on reality itself. The psychological manipulation extended beyond the mine. Families in the town, the rescuers themselves, were left with guilt, confusion, and fear. The narrative of an accident became embedded in memory, reinforced by authority and the absence of evidence. Truth was a luxury no one could afford. In Louisville, Whitlock watched from his office as the plan succeeded flawlessly. 5 lives erased, 1 inconvenient family removed from the map, and his empire unchallenged. The mechanics of power had been tested, proving that money, influence, and cold calculation could bend life and death to a corporate will. For 34 years, the Kellerman family remained missing, their bodies unrecovered, their story untold. To the outside world, it was a tragic mining accident, a cautionary tale whispered around the hearths of Pine Ridge. Yet beneath the surface, the truth festered like an unhealed wound, known only to a few men whose conscience could no longer hold it. In Louisville, Whitlock and his associates cemented their empire, coal profit, Etsy's swelling as competitors vanished or bowed. The mechanisms of control, bribery, legal intimidation, and carefully choreographed narratives became a blueprint for industrial dominance. Every mine collapse, every accident carried a shadow of the Kellerman's fate, but the masses never questioned the narrative. Meanwhile, in the mountains, whispers persisted. A dying man, haunted by guilt and the weight of history, finally broke his silence in 1889. His confession would shatter the illusion of accident, revealing the cold, deliberate orchestration that had murdered an entire family. For those listening, the story transformed from folklore to a lesson in how power bends morality. And here's the crucial point. The forces that buried the Kellerman's truth were not anomalies. They were the system itself, designed to protect wealth, erase inconvenient lives, and control the narrative of history. The collapse of the Kellerman mine was only the beginning. What followed was war waged on minds, not just bodies. The town of Pine Ridge, traumatized and uncertain, became a willing accomplice in its own ignorance. Fear crept into every conversation. Neighbors hesitated, children learned not to ask questions, and even friends became distant. Briggs's genius lay in invisibility. He never threatened overtly. He only suggested, hinted, and engineered circumstances that made doubt and guilt unbearable. Hartley, the farmer who nearly witnessed the family alive that morning, carried a permanent weight. Convinced that his presence, or absence, might have changed everything. Briggs exploited it, whispering reassurances that subtly shifted reality in his favor. Rescue efforts were stopped under the guise of safety. Questions were met with polite but firm authority. The town, exhausted and grief-stricken, accepted the narrative as natural law. Mines collapse, accidents happen, families die. And so, truth itself was suffocated by a mixture of psychology and social pressure. This was more than murder. It was a lesson in control, a blueprint showing that human perception could be manipulated as surely as the earth above a mine. And here is where I want you, the viewer, to lock in your awareness. Comment coal and shadow twice below. Let the phrase anchor your understanding of how systems of power operate unseen, shaping reality and identity alike. Whitlock and his executives were men who measured life in dollars and leverage. To them, the Kellermans were a minor obstacle, a variable in a ledger, lives to be managed, consequences calculated, risk minimized. Compassion was irrelevant, morality was a distraction from profit. The Pine Ridge solution was not impulsive. It was a strategically engineered operation, combining legal manipulation, economic pressure, and ultimately, lethal force. Every step had been planned to appear natural, every reaction anticipated, every loophole in law and society exploited. This was corporate power distilled into its purest, deadliest form. In Louisville, accountants and directors likely discussed the operation in mundane terms: loss mitigation, asset consolidation, risk management. Meanwhile, the mountains themselves bore witness to the erasure of an entire family. Their death became invisible, a footnote in the ledger of industrial America. This is the lesson the Kellerman story teaches, one few dare to acknowledge. Systems of wealth and authority will eliminate obstacles without hesitation, and the machinery of greed is capable of moral invisibility. A calculated silence that shields evil in plain sight. The danger is systemic, not personal. The people in power do not need to hate you personally. They only need to see you as inconvenient, replaceable, or costly. After the mine collapse, the truth of the Kellerman's deaths was buried deeper than the mountain itself. In Pine Ridge, the narrative of accident became a weapon, shaping behavior, enforcing compliance, and teaching a silent lesson. Don't challenge power, don't resist, and never get in the way of wealth. The town carried the story in fragments, whispered warnings to children, nervous glances at strangers, hushed speculation among neighbors. But the lesson was clear. The mountains reward obedience and punish audacity. Every miner, every farmer, every family who heard the tale understood, without being told, that survival often meant sacrificing truth for safety. Meanwhile, corporate leaders like Whitlock refined their techniques. The psychological architecture of control, isolation, intimidation, subtle manipulation became a standard. Human resistance was predictable, and fear was now a commodity as powerful as coal. The Kellermans had been pioneers, not just in mining, but in defiance. Their punishment became a warning etched into the collective psyche. And yet, hidden in the shadows, fragments of truth persisted, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Here, let the viewers engage their mind and anchor awareness again. Comment coal and shadow twice to claim insight into the mechanics of hidden power. 89. Decades after the Kentucky mountains swallowed the Kellermans, a man lay on his deathbed, trembling under the weight of a secret he had carried for 34 years. Samuel Briggs' plan, executed with surgical precision, had succeeded in hiding the truth, until now. The dying man confessed. The collapse had not been natural. The family had been deliberately buried, trapped by explosives timed to their work patterns, manipulated into the deepest, most vulnerable part of the mine. Every step, every precaution, every hope of survival had been calculate, and nullified. For years, the confession shook only the closest listeners, but the implications were enormous. It exposed the first corporate-sponsored mass murder in America, a blueprint of greed, calculation, and moral invisibility that would be repeated across industries for generations. It revealed that the mountains themselves had not claimed the Kellermans. Men had. Men who valued profit above humanity, who understood that history could be engineered to hide crime, and that society would accept whatever story authority fed them. The deathbed truth forced a reconsideration. What we accept as natural, as inevitable as fate, is often a construct of those who control power. The tragedy of the Kellermans was more than a story of murder. It was a manual for domination, a template showing how wealth, influence, and psychological manipulation could silence truth and bend communities to will. In the decades that followed, the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company's methods spread across industries. Mines, factories, and corporations adopted the same principles: isolate dissenters, manufacture accidents, exploit fear, and control the narrative. The lessons of Pine Ridge were quietly encoded into the DNA of industrial America, repeated whenever inconvenient obstacles threatened profits. The psychological architecture Briggs perfected, subtle intimidation, staged accidents, and the exploitation of guilt and social pressure, became a weapon invisible to the masses. Communities learned to police themselves, to accept authority without question, and to internalize the consequences of defiance. Even today, the echoes of Pine Ridge persist. Corporate agendas, political manipulation, and social control often operate on the same principles. Lives and truths sacrificed for profit, human perception engineered to accept the impossible as inevitable. The mountains did not swoon. Allow the Kellerman's society did. Their story is a warning. Those who control fear and narrative can rewrite reality itself. To know the truth of Pine Ridge is to see the world differently, to recognize that life, justice, and history are negotiable, often dictated by those willing to wield fear and secrecy with precision. Understanding this changes a man. It strips away comforting illusions, forcing him to confront the cold mechanics of control that shape society. Knowledge becomes a weapon. The more a man comprehends the interplay of greed, manipulation, and systemic violence, the less naive he becomes. He begins to notice subtle cues, whispered threats, silenced witnesses, orchestrated tragedies. He understands that ordinary accidents, natural disasters, and even societal norms can mask deliberate, invisible power. But this transformation carries weight. To see clearly is to bear responsibility for self-preservation, for understanding the patterns of control, and for refusing to be manipulated by forces that profit from human complacency. The story of the Kellermans is a mirror. It shows what happens to those who live in innocence while surrounded by calculated malice. This is the moment a man chooses: remain in ignorance or step into awareness and learn to navigate a world built on hidden agendas. The Pine Ridge solution was not an anomaly. It was a blueprint, a demonstration of how power exploits isolation, secrecy, and human trust to eliminate obstacles. The same principles are at work in boardrooms, political arenas, and social structures today. Lives are measured in cost-benefit calculations, inconvenient truths are buried, and perception is carefully curated to conceal reality. Understanding the Kellerman story is not just about history. It is a lesson in systemic manipulation. The same patterns repeat: the silencing of dissent, the normalization of risk disguised as accident, and the use of guilt and fear to control communities. Industries, governments, and institutions have inherited this playbook, operating in shadows, where accountability is optional and morality negotiable. For a man who grasps this, life becomes a chessboard. He sees the invisible moves, the quiet pressures, and the subtle strategies designed to enforce compliance. The world no longer appears random. It appears structured, orchestrated, and sometimes cruelly intentional. The fate of the Kellermans serves as a warning. Obedience can be fatal, knowledge is survival, and awareness is power. The mountains of Kentucky still hold the memory of the Kellermans, silent witnesses to greed, calculation, and human expendability. Their story is not just a tale of murder. It is a mirror reflecting the structures of power that have never changed. Every corporation, every institution, every system that demands compliance at the expense of life carries echoes of Pine Ridge. To hear this truth is to step into a shadowed understanding. You now see that accidents are not always accidents. Disasters are often engineered, and the machinery of control thrives on your ignorance. The world is not as it seems. It is layered, deliberate, and manipulated by forces that do not value morality, only outcome. The Kellermans were ordinary people, yet their defiance marked them for destruction. Their tragedy teaches that freedom, awareness, and survival require vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. History is not safe. It is a tool, a weapon, and a map. Those who understand it can navigate the currents of power. Those who do not are consumed. Remember what you've learned here. Let it sharpen your perception, harden your resolve, and awaken the part of you that refuses to be manipulated. The truth is dangerous, but knowing it is transformative.